Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Justin Jeffress, and I am an evangelist at Amazon, and I teach people how to build Alexa skills. And we have Nathan Grice on today. Nathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Nathan Grice. For those of you guys that tuned in on Tuesday, this is part two of a little bit deeper dive into Alexa conversations. I'm a solutions architect on the what's called the North Star team in Alexa, which is sort of looking to push the boundaries of voice experiences and pick up any new technology to showcase those boundary pushes.
Cool. Yes, and part of that pushing the boundaries was, getting early access to kick the tires and put and build skills for Alexa conversations. And one of the things that came out of that is the pizza reference skill, which we started tearing down on Tuesday, and we're going to complete that process today. So we'll start off with a sort of review as to what we covered on Tuesday, and give you an opportunity to ask any sort of follow-up questions that you may have had for those of you who have tuned in on Tuesday. But before I turn that over to Nathan to run that, I just wanted to go through a few housekeeping items. So let's see. This should be my screen. Yes. Okay. I have a little bit of a complicated setup here. I'm able to share my screen and Nathan's screen. So hopefully I don't accidentally share the wrong screen at the wrong time. So, okay. One thing that I want to bring all to your attention is, hopefully by now you're all aware of this, but for those of you who are new or who are tuning in for the first time, there is a hackathon that's going on at this time. It's the Alexa Skills Challenge for Alexa Conversations, and the submission deadline is September 14th. So you have 18 days. We got a nice little countdown timer here. So you have 17 days, 13 hours to go. And that's the date for submission. I'm going to go ahead and paste the link to the hackathon in the chat here. But you can see we have over $101,000 in prizes, and there's a bunch of different prize categories. So I would highly recommend that you take a look. And if you haven't decided on what it is that you want to build for the hackathon, I would highly suggest that you solidify those ideas and start working, because 17 days may seem like a lot of time, but it's a little over 2 weeks. So if you put it in that context, 2 weeks is right around the corner. And so also there's some nice resources that we have available for you on this resources tab. There is a group on Slack, or a workspace for the contest, and so you can go there and ask questions. And actually Nathan was on yesterday morning for the AMA, and so he was answering your questions about the pizza reference skill and about Alexa conversations in general. There, he did that yesterday. Those questions and answers are still available in the Ask Me Anything channel in the Slack group. So you can actually go and take a look at those questions and see what those answers were, even though the AMA is over. We also have a nice little schedule here of all the different things that we have been streaming. We have a huge catalog of content that we have provided. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link here into the chat. So right now we are doing the part 2 of the pizza ordering template teardown. So this is where we are today. And then on Saturday, we're going to be doing the Alexa India community event, which is going to be really cool. It's really early for me. It's like 6 in the morning or 5 in the morning my time. I don't remember exactly. I'll have to remember so I make it on time. And then, we have office hours on the 31st at our normal 9 a.m. time. So, yes. I think that's all the housekeeping items at this point. Oh yes, I wanted to share the source code for the pizza reference skill is available on GitHub. So I'm going to drop the link to that in the chat. So we have that there, so you can take a look at the source code. And then if you're curious and you want to see the model, how it's built, if you log into the developer console and you create a skill, you can choose the pizza reference template as one of the starting points, and it will create the model for you. And so you can look at that and follow along. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan, and Nathan will be able to we'll talk about the things that he talked about during the last stream, and then give you a chance to ask some questions, and then we'll move on to what we're going to cover today in part 2. So take it away, Nathan.
Cool. Did you talk about the stream you did this morning? I may have missed it.
Yeah, sorry, that's a good point. So yeah, this morning, about 30 minutes ago, Jeff Blankenberg and Jeff Blankenberg interviewed on Alexa and Friends me, Kavindra, and Charlie, who are engineers at Amazon who worked on Alexa Conversations. So Charlie worked on the build process, so the part that takes the simulator that simulates the dialogue and figures out how the conversation could deviate from your happy path and expands out those deviations, so it makes your model more robust. And then Kavindra worked on the runtime part, so how Alexa Conversations works at runtime. So Jeff asked a lot of really great questions, and let me find the video for that, because the video is available on Twitch. So I'll share the video for that in the chat as well. So those of you who missed it will be able to check out that video and see the replay. We got some positive feedback in the Slack group from people saying, hey, this was really informative. It was really great to help understand some of the concepts. So there we go. I dropped that in the chat. You've got the link. And so since this is live, I would say don't pause us. Keep watching this stream and bookmark the conversation about Alexa Conversations and watch that after you finish watching this. So great. Yeah, I know I sent a barrage of links at you, but now we have everything that we need to get started. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Nathan to recap what we did on the last stream and open it up for questions. And then after that, we'll dive into part 2.
Yep. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, the reason I wanted to make sure you talked about the stream this morning, in particular with this component of the system called the simulator, which the simulator, as Justin mentioned, is kind of the piece that determines the variability of a default model, right? When you're writing utterance sets that fill values, it's the one that sort of fills in permutations and makes it a little bit more robust. And so a lot of you had questions about how that works on Tuesday. And so, it'd be good to watch that content, and so you can get more insight into how that piece works. Because it's a real vital piece in understanding how what you put into the console in terms of dialogues, specifically with dialogue acts, how the components of a dialogue are sort of chained together with different dialogue acts. That directly affects the predictor behavior in the simulator, and then can kind of alter how user flows through your trained model. So I just wanted to make sure to call it out. So on Tuesday we covered a few things, and I'll just go back through this. We talked about lists. We talked about this concept of context, and I've used this term API frame in the past, which is this idea that once a user invokes a particular sort of heads down the path of a goal towards an API call, you're sort of loading that context into a frame, and that the conversation system is going to work to fill the required values, and we'll continue to ask questions and so forth. And then we talked about delegation a little bit. I think we mostly covered how to delegate from an interaction model to Alexa Conversations. So I want to finish off with talking about how to delegate from conversations back to a skill, back to an interaction model.
And I think it's important that we cover that, because I've seen some questions in the Slack group, like, people seem to understand how to go from the interaction model to Alexa Conversations, but I think there's like a little bit of, oh well, where do I make where do I write the code that forwards back from Alexa Conversations to the interaction model? So I think it's important that we cover that.
Okay, and so I just wanted to cover talk about what we did last time, in case you guys on the chat, if you have things you want to go back over or cover again, in more detail, please just post those questions. The other thing we want to get to today is we're going to talk about confirmation templates. I think this is a really important concept. There's a couple different kinds of confirmation. There's entity confirmation and API confirmation. And there's some sort of built-in behavior for both of those at this time that we want to make sure that you're clear on how to use those. And then we also want to talk about the debug features available in the console that can kind of give you a sense of the state of the simulator at any given moment. So as you can see, we are rebuilding. So we found some issues that we needed to rebuild the model. So as you know, that can take some time. So we won't be able to demo until this is complete. It started probably 10 minutes ago, and the light Alexa build, the light model build is already finished. So you actually are able to test a little bit after the light. We internally call it a low fidelity build. It means that we've built a decent representation of your interaction model and your dialogues, and should allow you to go ahead and test in the console. But the simulator is not done sort of filling in all of those permutations and variations that will be sort of ingested into the model. So like I said, if you want to test new interactions, kind of happy paths, maybe some of the surface form dialogues, you can get started on those after the light Alexa build is finished. But you should wait for the full model build to finish before you should expect sort of consistent results. Okay, so let's talk about delegation a little bit. So I have delegation both ways in this skill. So the interaction model supports.
Real quick, Nathan, could you make your text a little bit bigger?
Oh, yes, yeah. Right.
I know you're on a different computer today than you were on Tuesday, so all of your settings aren't. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully I don't end up scrolling around too much. So let me go back to the interaction model, because this is kind of important. If you've gone through this skill at all and loaded it into the test console and started, you notice that it sort of prompts you in the beginning. And we talked about this last time for things by design to highlight delegation between conversations in regular intent schemas. We modeled this so that one-shot utterances are handled by Alexa or by the interaction schema, and then more complex sort of slot filling, context-dependent interactions are handled by Alexa conversations. So some of these built-ins here. So you can see this build my own pizza intent. This is kind of the default phrasing for I want to build a custom pizza. And we saw what that dialogue looked like last time. It expects a size, and it expects a crust option and your cheese option and a list of toppings. We also have kind of an order a 2-topping pizza intent. Let me show you. Actually, this handles the same interaction. I think I showed some of that in the delegation piece last time, right? So order A, and this is a number slot, topping pizza. So this intent handles that phrase, and then sort of is a selector for where you want to delegate the user to in Alexa conversations. So let's look at what this looks like.
And before you get to the code, one thing that I want to point out here is and you said something really important, Nathan, is that by design, you chose to use Alexa Conversations, where Alexa Conversations makes sense, and you use your interaction model where it makes sense, right? So those one-shot utterances where it doesn't really matter, or not really doesn't matter, that's the wrong word, where you're doing where there is no back and forth. It's like, oh, I want a 3-topping pizza, like that. You don't really need a lot of back and forth between that. But then when you actually need to make customizations of something, that's when you would delegate to Alexa Conversations. So this is a great example of using each tool in your tool belt for the appropriate job.
Yeah, I think that's I think you can think of it in designing, think of it as ambiguity, right? Which is like the phrase order a 2-topping pizza. It's pretty declarative. You know what the user wants, or order a pizza.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know all the things that user wants, but you know their intent. You know what goal they're trying to seek, right? And so you can, if you have a model dialogue that handles that for you, and this is what I talked about, treating dialogues kind of like functions, right? Which is, especially in the delegation case, which is like, for me, delegation was modeled similar to me calling a function in any programming language, which is like, I call this function and you hand me back a pizza. I call this function, you hand me back a two-topping pizza, and so forth, right? So it's a way you can model that is once you need to resolve ambiguity and and rely on the powers of the features of the simulator, right, to handle that variability, to handle corrections, to handle context carryover. This is where you'd want to hand it off to the best tool for that.
Right.
Again, so if we look at how we're delegating, really it's just a directive that you add to your skills response. So here's the code. The actual Node.js SDK has a function for this. So you do use the handler input response builder object. You call the add directive method, and then you just pass it. Oh, I'm about to move that. That is not the intent. Ooh. That, yeah, sorry. Then you just pass it a JSON object, and this course get response actually returns the response. So in this case, we are putting in a dialog.delegate request. We're telling its target is conversations. Now, right now, this explicit return, this is kind of hard-coded. There, at once upon a time, and I don't know if this will be featured at some point, there used to be you could modify this to basically delegate back to the interaction model on every turn. But I think that honestly doesn't make as much sense. The idea that if you're delegating off to conversations to ask a single question, you could probably do that in a regular interaction model. So this explicit return makes more sense, right? This is saying to the developer, hey, until I get another delegate request that tells me to go back to the skill, I'm going to leave the user in that conversations dialog and wait for that dialog context to fill all the values and call the API. Basically, the next time at which the dialog touches your Lambda function, right? Sorry, I keep looking at this window because it's got the Twitch stream up, so I'm kind of, but I need to stop doing that. I need to look this up.
No worries.
Yeah. So again, this dialog.input request, this input in this case, the input it's expecting is the name of one of your utterance sets, right? So your utterance set, it's as if you're passing the phrase to Alexa conversation. So if we pop back over to the console and we look at one of the utterance sets here, I think it's called start. Sorry, this is really pumped up now. Start 2-topping pizza order, right? So if I look at this, these phrases are also supported. So the reason it's important to put these phrases in here is in the case of a one-shot, right? So if in this case, I launched the skill, I said, open pizza reference, it prompted me for daily specials, I listened to them, and then it said, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, order a 2-topping pizza. Well, in the code, I figured out, okay, they asked for 2 for this count variable, which means 2 toppings. And so if that exists, I'm pretty sure they want a 2-topping pizza. So I'll specifically send them to the 2-topping pizza order. And if we look at that dialog, sorry, I'm going to pop it around too much. But if we look at that dialog, it's as if you jumped the user straight to this. It's almost like you're taking the phrase and mimicking it for the user, saying, hey, Alexa conversations, pretend that the user said exactly this. And so the context gets loaded. Now, if this has variables that you're informing at the same time, right? In this case, this entire dialog is dedicated to ordering a 2-topping pizza, right? So it asks you, okay, what 2 toppings would you like? Versus, maybe, sorry, this is really gotten crazy. How do I get rid of that? This is where my screen size is working against us here, Justin. Let me go down one.
Feel free to adjust. It still looks pretty good.
Okay, that I think people can still. I'm looking at the stream. It looks like it's okay.
Yeah, I might be able to do this. There we go.
Oh yeah. I wish I could slide this right here. That would make a big difference. Okay, so again, you're sort of fast forwarding the user to the start of a dialogue, and you could, feel free. If this were a variable that affected the rest of the conversation, right? I could highlight this and say, oh, well, this is going to be a number, and I'm going to assign it to a variable called, topping count. Now, it's not a part of my API call, but maybe I programmatically figure out, hey, well, they asked for a 2 topping, 3 topping, so I need to ask the right questions, right? So you can inform at the same time. And let's look at how you do that in code. Now, in this case, this is just, all they said is I want a 2 topping pizza. So I fast forwarded them over to that dialogue with a delegate request that looks like this structure right here. Okay, so now if they, in this case, they're asking for a specific size. So I want a large pepperoni pizza, or I just want I want an extra large pizza. This is a better example. So in this case, the interaction model is figuring out, hey, did they tell me a size in that phrase? Yes. If the size slot exists and it has a value, then let's go ahead and send them to the order specific size pizza and pass in a list of slots. So it has this structure, and I know it can be tricky if you use the word name for your slot or value,
Right.
but the left-hand side of this JSON is actually fixed, and these are the only things that change on this right-hand side. So this is the actual name of the informed slot in your dialogue, right? The one you're sort of passing along to be auto-filled so that Alexa Conversations doesn't have to ask the question. And this is the value that you want to pass in for that slot.
Right.
So again, if we go and look at order specific size pizza in the let me look at my utterance set.
Yeah, and so one thing that I want to call out here is that, what you're able to do here when you delegate from your interaction model to Alexa Conversations is you're able to set the context of the dialogue. And since you're able to set that context, you can pretty much jump to any spot of your sample dialogue. And that's why you're specifying in the JSON there, not the name of the sample dialogue, but the utterance set itself. Like Nathan said earlier, you're telling Alexa Conversations, hey, pretend that the user said this. It's you're saying, hey, I've got the information, I've collected it. The user, my interaction model, my backend, was received this request for this intent, and it's got this slot. So I'm going to call I'm going to tell Alexa Conversations, hey, you need to start up, and here is the state that you need to start up in. And so you're passing that context over.
Right. And it is an important note because, the way the dialogues are structured, again, if you're loading a context into frame, and I consider that to be like you're loading a list of questions for Alexa to ask, right, for a specific API goal. Depending on all the information you collected in the interaction model, right? In this case, they told us the size in their utterance, right? So we're going to go ahead and use that rather than re-asking the question. If they told us a size and a very common phrase in pizza ordering, I want a large pepperoni pizza. So I could extend this to say order a size and then fill this out with topping. And of course I don't have that slot in my in this utterance set, but it would just fast forward the user past that question, right? So that the system seems more intelligent. And that's the way you want to build this. Now, the really nice part is you can be sort of agnostic to the phrasing at this point. You do want to put in, and I want to go back to the important note about one-shot utterances. You do want to put in a decent variability here. This is obviously not quite robust enough. If I were launching this instead of a reference to how to do things, a real user experience, I would fill this out with. And to our point on Tuesday about sort of watching how users interact with your skill, see all the different ways they ask to order, a large pizza.
Yeah.
My family needs a extra large.
This morning on a conversation about Alexa Conversations with Jeff Blankenberg, actually he asked this very question, like how many sample utterances should we provide for our utterance sets, and Charlie answered about 7 to 10. So you don't need to go overboard and do too many. Like he said, if you're putting in 1,000, that's probably too many. But he said 7 to 10 is a pretty good rule of thumb to go by as far as like giving those sample utterances.
Really nice UI features to fill this in, very similar to interaction model. You can just start typing. As soon as you type that first left curly brace, it sort of knows which slots you have for this pizza. Now, I want to point out something else, and I think you guys covered this in Pet Match. Despite this dialog act being an invoke, right? And you're saying if a user says something similar to this, then I want to invoke the order pizza API, right? And I'm going to pre-fill the size slot in this case, right? It could be, and you can sort of pre-fill as many as you want, depending on what you collect from the interaction model. But it's also informing, right? It's sort of, you're telling the system, hey, this is also filling a variable called size. So any of the APIs that happen to use a size, in this case, the order pizza does use the size variable. Go ahead and pre-fill those. If it, you can also put utterances in here that don't have that size variable filled. So you can mix and match the actual utterances to 0 to n slots being filled with a single phrase, with a single utterance. So it's an important note. But you'll always want to choose invoke here rather than inform, right? So you don't want to, even though it is informing, if the goal of somebody starting with this phrase is to invoke an API, you want to tell our system, hey, this is an invoke phrase, right? It's kind of the start of one of your dialogues. So yeah, the other reason to have these in here, what you might think as a function of this delegation is, well, hey, wait, I'm doing all the, the work to kind of route them towards their goal in my interaction model. And if they say this phrase, I will programmatically determine where to send them, right? So you'd think, well, maybe I don't need to fill out this. Well, there's a chance they could launch the skill and say this at the same time, which now in our case, it would follow this path and automatically delegate because you need to recreate these phrases over in your interaction model. And the reason for that is because we have the checkbox in the interfaces for Alexa Conversations. We have this unchecked.
Your conversations.
Oh, sorry, you guys. Let me mute my device. Alexa, stop. Wow, almost started playing Katy Perry on me. Okay. So in this case, this is saying the interaction model kind of gets first dibs on any phrase, including a one-shot invocation. So in that case, if you want your code to handle that, you need to model those phrases in your interaction model, right? And we've done that. So it can look a little repetitive, but it actually just fast forwards the user to the intended goal quicker. So some value there. Now, I think we've covered how to delegate to conversations. Let's cover how to delegate back to the skill.
Cool. Yes. So this will help tie that loop. Because we've got a lot of great questions, and people are like, "Oh, hey, how do I go back?"
Yeah. So in this case, I broke up again, treating my dialogues as function calls, right? I'm going to call you. You return back a pizza object. So here's a case where this is the order pizza. So this is the default, like this is the name of the API, right? So at the end of the dialog, and let's go look at the dialog so that you can see what's going on here. So this utterance set, start pizza order, it's a invoke utterance for the order pizza API, right? It goes through, collects all of these required variables, and at the end calls the order pizza API. And again, this is the point at which your Lambda function gets called. You need to have a matching handler in your function named exactly this, right? So the structure will be the dialog.api.invoked. And the name will be the name of your API that's in the console, and it will pass a JSON object that has the variables you've collected that are required, or the optional variables that were collected during this dialog.
Yes, and so one thing I want to point out is, if you haven't built an Alexa Conversations skill before, I remember when I was first starting out, the question that I had was like, so how do I handle the requests? Like, what's going to be sent to my skills backend? And so you're going to use the exact same backend. You don't need one endpoint that handles your interaction model requests, and you don't need a different one for handling Alexa Conversations based requests. They both get funneled into the same endpoint. The only difference is the payload that comes to your skill. So the request type for an intent or an interaction model are things that you should be familiar with, which are the launch request, session ended request, intent request. Those will come, and those are from the interaction model. Anything that comes from Alexa Conversations, the type is dialog.api.invoked, and it includes a API request. And in that API request, there's an identifier that identifies which API which was called. So as Nathan was saying, there's that, what was the name of your API definition there? It was like
order pizza.
Yeah. So yeah, what will happen is you'll get a request that's where the type is dialog.api.invoked and the name is order pizza. And so you'll write, if you're using the SDK, you'll write a handler that has a can handle that looks to see if the type is dialog.api.invoked and the name of the API request is order pizza, and that will return true, and that means that handler will handle the request that came to the skill.
Yeah, and you register these the same way you register intent handlers. So I just started the pattern, and you can choose to go ahead and put, like, you could name this order pizza API handler or order pizza API. Maybe that's clearer, right? But for anything that was an intent handler, I sort of put the normal intent handler, help intent handler, get hours intent handler, so forth for that pattern. And then if it was an API, it was literally just the name of the API in the console, right? Just to be nice and clear. You can remember, these names don't have to match as long as the code under the covers is checking for the right names. Let me show you what that looks like. Sorry, I don't know why I'm jumping around here. So, Justin was just mentioning, how do you figure out it's an API call? Well, in this request utils, we have some helper functions to figure out if it's an API call. So let me scroll down to, here we go, is API request. So it checks if it's a dialog.api invoked, and that the request API request name, and this is the structure of the JSON object that will be passed when the context, again, the list of questions that are part of the dialog is fulfilled and it's ready, to call your API because you've specified that in your surface form dialog. So if that name equals the API name that you passed in this function, let me go back here. Sorry.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear here, that is API request is something that you wrote. That's not part of the SDK.
That's right. Yeah. It's just that you start writing so much boilerplate code over and over and over again of like, is it dialog.api.invoked and does the name equal order pizza? Now, in this case, right, I happen to name the handler function exactly the name of the API. But this is the string that matters, right? You could call this, whatever you want. It doesn't matter, but it will, the can handle will pass the execution to the handle function if this resolves to true, right? So in this case, it's saying, is it an API invoked call instead of an intent request, which is built into that is API request, and does its name match the expected API name in the console? So in this case, we're doing something pretty simple. So we, again, built a pizza object. And I can, hopefully now that that build is finished, we can go through a demo and actually look at the code being passed back and forth from our system. But again, a pizza object, remember, consists of, in this case, we can actually look at it in the slots here. Here we go. So I've modeled the pizza object to be a list of toppings because this toggle is on. Again, this slot type, I happen to create a name thing called toppings, but you could have this be a list of Amazon.food for the built-in type. Mm-hmm. Cheese, again, this is for common cheese phrases, and this is where the synonyms for entity resolution will work out really well here, because there's lots of different ways people might say light cheese, or easy cheese, or whatever, there's different ways people say things, and you want that to map to something your code understands. In this case, I just use the word light, for example. So you go look at the cheese object and look at all the different ways we allowed for that variability. Ask for a crust option. Again, crust being, maybe something specific. You want to provide values in this case because it would be, we did, Brooklyn and deep dish and thin and so forth. Again, lots of synonyms there. And then size. I think a size is a good opportunity to showcase the how you would use the synonyms for this. Let me take a look. But anyway, so you can see this is a complex object type, right? So it's named pizza, but when the JSON object is passed to you, it's passing, the API is passing this list, right? And so what I'm saying when I consume this is, hey, you've passed me a list of API arguments that includes a list of toppings, a value for size, a value for cheese, and a value for crust. So I'm going to assign that to a variable called pizza, and I'm going to stuff that in the session attributes. Now, if you did persistence, and originally we had some Dynamo persistence in this skill, and then because it became a hosted template, hosted templates don't have access to Dynamo by default. So we need to move this to S3 storage. But the idea is that this is an in-progress order. If the user were to drop away from the conversation, walk away from their device, or get into the argument about with the family about what toppings they want and bail, then you could use this to persist their in-progress order. And so when they came back, you can actually check to see if they have an in-progress order. We ended up moving all this to the session. So if they happen to ask, what the store hours are, or can that be delivered, or maybe some of the other variations that are handled in the interaction model, and then come back to this, it would be an in-progress order. But that's the idea.
I think that's a really great point that you're making here, is that, Alexa Conversations is it's really great at handling all the ambiguity of speech, but one thing it's doing is it's keeping track of that conversational context. And so once the session has ended, that conversational context is gone. And so if you need to reset that conversational context after, and what I mean by the session being ending is if the skill closes, right? So if the skill closes and they start up the skill, they'll have to start from the beginning. And as Nathan was talking about, if their family is arguing about toppings, it's very natural that they're going to close the skill, have a discussion, open it back up, and start over. And so in this case, what is great about using this hybrid approach where you have Alexa Conversations and an interaction model working together is when they start up the skill, you can check your persistent attribute store and see, oh, was there an order in progress? Yes. All right. So now let's, hydrate the, that data into memory and pass them over and let them pick up right where they left off and in a seamless experience.
Yep. Yeah. So now you can see the different structure. Now it's really the same here, which is you're inserting now notice I didn't use the API call for response builder because we're not returning a full skill response. We literally want to just pass back to the conversation system at this point a list of directives where the first entry in that list is a delegate request and the target is the skill in this case. This is the big difference right here, is that instead of being target amazon.conversations, then you just say, hey, this is going back to the skill. And that's sort of telling our system, hey, they want to handle this in the interaction model. So in this case, you can pass it to a specific intent. So in this case, this was an order pizza, but now we're passing off to an order intent. Let's look at what that does. Oh boy. Too many words for order. Yeah. Okay. So the order intent basically checks to see if there is an in progress order and then pushes that into an orders object and then prompts them to place the order. So this is where I sort of broke apart, like, they built the pizza. We called out to the system to help us with resolve ambiguity and ask a bunch of questions, allow for variability of input in the form of lists and choices and synonyms and so forth, and all the other state that we might have to otherwise track, right? That would be really complicated in an interaction model, knowing which question to ask and so forth. Given that they could sort of interrupt that flow and ask a out of goal question at any time, that's where handling all this in an interaction model becomes challenging, and something that conversations will be good at, which is, allowing for them to ask those questions if you've modeled them in different dialogues, and then return to the original goal of like, hey, I've still got some stuff I got to ask you about that pizza order you're trying to accomplish. And then in the interaction model, I tried to break it up so that this was the business logic side of it, right? Which is, okay, I've got a pizza order here, and we want to execute that order. So the idea is that you could extend this to handle, payments, or adding orders to favorites, or anything that's a little less ambiguous at this point about the conversation. So it's pretty straightforward. And I think the other benefit, in my opinion, is we'll get to this when we talk about response templates overall, but the idea that you get a little bit more directionality from the conversation. So it is, in my opinion, a little easier to modify prompts in your interaction model, right? So I've got this localization package that relies on this resources file, and you can see I put all the strings here. And this is where we construct the speech to send back to the user. In this case, I generically reprompt them, right? What would you like to do next? And this gives the opportunity for the interaction model to sort of handle the next thing. And if that's delegating back to conversations to achieve a goal, order another pizza. But you can imagine that you would want to maybe, hey, they just ordered a pizza. Maybe you check the order object that we stored in the session to say, hey, that's their first pizza order today. Maybe we should check and see if they want to add some sides to that, or desserts, or some drinks, right? This is a good chance for you to contextually reprompt them, right? So you could add an entry here that's like place order and offer something, right?
Right. So one thing I want to point out here is this object that you're showing that says translation, and it's got all these different, this is for localization. So, if you want to support like multiple languages from the same Lambda function. You can use, I don't know what library you're using, probably I18,
I18 next.
I18, yeah. So,
So,
at this current moment, Alexa Conversations is only supported with, the ENUS locale. However, the way how Nathan has set this up is in the future, when more and more regions come available, the plumbing is there to be able to easily add in on the code side of things support for more languages. And so the way how it works is you have a key, and then you have that mapped to what the words that you want to be said. So if you were going to do another language, like eventually, when, say for example, I'm not confirming that this is happening or when this is happening, but let's say for sake of argument that the Spanish support is added, you would add another Spanish section in the resources.js file and map the keys to the values, and then at runtime it'll use those strings for the responses. You would still have to then also go through and create a whole new interaction model for the language that you're going to support. But again, at this time, presently, Alexa Conversations is only supported by the ENUS region. And I can't speak to, because I don't know when the other locales and other things will be added. So.
Yeah, I think there's a feature to copy the interaction model to other English locales, right? Or locales where the interaction model can be used in English, right?
Yes, there is a way. Yeah, because there's different cultural and differences of language, even though it's the same language and grammar structure. There's various ways of speaking, spelling, and yes, you can roll that over and build those. But again, like Alexa Conversations at this moment is only supported in the ENUS locale.
Yeah. So yeah, really standard way to do this. You just insert a localization interceptor, and then you register that as a request interceptor. There was a good question on Slack yesterday about this. So you just register it as a localization interceptor. It grabs the locale out of the request and then maps that to any locales that you have implemented, right? So if I wanted to, change this to ES for Spanish or something, once those regions are supported. Another important note is that SSML is supported here, right? I like this format because you can pass in variables.
And for those of you who are unfamiliar, SSML is speech synthesis markup language, and it allows you to be able to modify the speech. And these are also available to you in the APL response templates. So they allow you to change the pitch. You can add breaks. You can do a bunch of different things to manipulate and tune up the speech to make it sound a little bit more natural.
Yep. And then using this, I don't remember which package. It may be that A18 next, or that maybe it's that. I think it's the sprintf actually that lets you pass in sort of these variables so you can make your speech more dynamic. I had cases where, in fact, the order text. I ended up writing a helper function for this. I think it's part of menu.js, which is like generate order text or something. Yeah, here it is. Really ugly function, but you can imagine how complicated orders get, right? It's like, do they have specials in their order? Do they have pizzas? Oh yeah, it wants me to do these not equals like this. Difference in our linters, I guess, between my IDE. And do they have salads and drinks and so forth? And if they do, constructing the logic, and this is what I was getting to earlier, which is doing a lot of this in APLA would be, there's a lot of code there, right? And until you get really good at APLA, I would, recommend working with the tool set you're most comfortable with. In this case, it was easier for me to construct sort of a speech object that is representative of their whole order, and is because you can encode all this logic in APLA. It's just that at the time I was building, I was unfamiliar with APLA. It was the new hotness, and I was concerned with getting something built, right? So again, the delegation, let me go back to. So we delegated back to this, and rather than put that response in a response template, you're able to sort of direct the user a little bit with more context here. And you can put those conditions in APLA, but I think you'll end up with a fairly large response template. For example, if the response template was called order pizza success, accounting for all the different states that you want to sort of direct the user to after they complete different things might be more complicated there than doing it here in code. So this gives you the opportunity to sort of, be more rich with your responses and then allow for the interaction model to handle kind of the next thing, whatever that would be. So I think that's kind of delegation. If we have other questions or people want to go back to anything.
Yeah, we did have an interesting question in the chat. It's not related to delegation, but Harkima asks, maybe a little bit of off topic today's session, but I was wondering how the system resolves referential expressions. For example, I want 3 pizzas with 2 cheese and 1 with pineapple. Put some bacon on the ones with cheese. Do I need to provide training examples for all possible expressions of this kind?
Yeah, that is a pretty rich. You know what? I wish I could see that question so I could recreate
Right?
it
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, it is. It's a rich question with a lot of things to think about and unpack.
Well, there's a VUI element to that, right? Do you, we've seen success with skills that kind of guide the user with accurate and short questions to get the user to their goal quickly. Now, if you expect your user to say something like that in a one shot, then ultimately the answer to your question is yes. You would have to model a phrase that kind of unpacks all that, right? Including, so in that case, do you mind reading let me.
I might be able to, but you don't, if, here.
You could paste it in our Skype chat, maybe? I don't, yeah, if that's.
These are on separate computers.
Oh, yeah, okay.
What
That's
I
okay.
could do is this and zoom in on the text. So you should be able to see on stream. This might be breaking the fourth wall of the internet. There we go. I've been keeping a log. Oh, my face is right over the top of it. So let me move that over here.
Yeah. So let's just walk through that. I want, and let's just say like number, and these aren't existing. 3 pizza. Oh, it went away.
Yeah, sorry. I thought I saw you typing on the other screen, so I switched over so they could see what you're doing. But then I realized, you need to see to copy. So I'll let you copy that down, and then I'll switch over to your screen, and then you can walk through what you're doing. Let me know when I can switch.
Almost done.
I love it. We're live coding a question that we got in the chat. This is great.
No, I don't. Oh yeah, I can't do numbers.
So yeah, you can't see what Nathan's doing at this time, but I can see what's on his screen. So I'll give you a little bit of a play-by-play. So he's editing. Okay. So before I switch, he edited a utterance set and started typing in the sample phrase that was in the question and marked what the slots would be. So let's switch over now. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I would have concerns about supporting a phrase of this complexity in a one shot. You know, imagining what you need to think about is what is the goal here? The goal would be to order 30 pizzas, right? Or just maybe order n pizzas is how you could model an API after that. And then each pizza would have its own sort of modification in this case. You know, supporting the phrases, I think what you would probably want to do is, you know, based on, yeah, so in the next request templates, so what you would do is your API needs values, right, for each of the things that you want to fill in this flow, right? So 3 pizzas, each with their own toppings, and, you know, maybe that's it, right? Because I think that's all we're specifying here. Is like one's got bacon and one's, or 2 are cheese only, and so forth. That what you would want to do is in your request templates is based on, so put some conditionality in there in the APLA that based on what the system knows at that moment. So what you do is pass most of these into a request template, and then with the assumption that you need to fill some new value, right? Something you don't know that you need to ask. Now, if this is all the information your API needs, like for example, your backend code could sort of decode this and understand what it is they were looking for. Like if you could structure this into an object that meant something to your Lambda code and then execute the order, there's no reason this one shot couldn't just automatically turn into an API call, right? Because if the context is expecting, you know, the count of pizzas, and I know that, you know, 2 of them are cheese and 1 of them has, and I don't remember what the modifier was. And then, you know, in this case, you're sort of tacking on elements to those. They would all have to come in as distinct variables. But again, if your code could unpack all that and execute the API, there's no reason you couldn't do this as a one shot. My guess is you would have to, there would be some disambiguation there. There's some other things you might want to ask them, right? There's some other questions, like you're normally ordering pizza, and in this case, there's some things they didn't say, right? Do they want deep dish crust, or is it gluten-free, or so forth? And so to be a well-rounded experience, you probably have the context ask those kinds of questions as well, right? So that you didn't make assumptions about their order. So in that case, if you had the opportunity to programmatically in APLA decide what you've got and some other, you know, questions you need to re-ask or clarify, you could do that based on the values that they provided you in the one shot, right? So what you do is you just pass these variables into a request into a response template, whose the API goal, or the dialog act is set to request, and then based on those values, you know what kinds of questions you need to ask, right? So it's a little complicated. I would probably prefer to train my users to by leading them with directed questions, right? And rather than expect them to sort of get it all right at once. I mean, you see the same problem in regular interaction models, right? Which is there's this kind of magic key concept to really long specific utterances, you know, where it's like, if they know the magic key and they say it exactly right, and Alexa hears everything perfectly and all your slots are filled perfectly, then great, I can help you. If some of those things aren't right, you know, they either don't know the magic phrase, Alexa heard something correctly, therefore some slots weren't filled correctly, you have to disambiguate that in your code. And this is where tracking all that state in interaction models gets really challenging, whereas doing it in conversations, you're really just telling the system, like, hey, these are all the things you need to have before you call my API. So figure out which question to ask next. I've got a bunch of different sample utterances. So if we entered this, of course I'm gonna, and if I, you know, to fill this out to be really robust, right? I want pieces with, for example, this is, so I want 3 pizzas with pepperoni. Okay, so great. I've told, now if the order to top, this is a bad example for your specific phrase here, but if I told the system, that here's what I've given you, and you've got a list of questions to ask still, because the order to topping pizza needs those things. This is really the power of conversations, is saying like, I'm going to support all of these different kinds of phrases, which will provide 0 to all of the required variables for a specific API. And I'm going to leave it up to the system to ask those questions.
Right, and that ties into Timto. I don't know how to pronounce the last part of the name. I've seen you posting all over the place in our different streams and stuff. So, this ties into his question. Tim is good. Asking, could you show the delegation code from like Alexa conversation to like for example, they say like, I want a large pizza, and then the user says, wait, are you following the CDC guidelines? And then passing control back to Alexa conversations, asking, continuing on asking about the toppings. And so, the way you want to think about Alexa conversations is that like you specify like a sample dialogue, but the sample dialogue doesn't have to go in the exact flow or order that you specified it in. So if you have an API that can answer that question, are you following the CDC guidelines? And even if it's in a different sample dialogue, if the user says that, that API that answers that question will be invoked, come back, talks about how, and then because you are in the middle of a dialogue that is collecting the slots in order to place that pizza order, it will automatically determine that, oh, hey, we still need to continue collecting these slots. So it will then follow up with the question to, ask for the next part of the things that it needs to collect for to place that order.
Yeah.
So you don't actually have to like map out every single combination, as long as you have a dialogue that shows like, here's how you do that. Tim says, even if the CDC dialogue was part of the I think what you mean by invocation model is interaction model. Yeah, so in that case, you would probably have to delegate, I would imagine, right, Nathan?
Yeah, so again, the explicit return thing is really important here, and I think I switched away from, there we go, sorry.
And then I think we should try to do your demo and then move on to some of the other topics. I think you were planning to talk about confirmation and affirmation denial.
Yeah.
And somebody in the chat, Sandwich20, was asking about that. So we are planning on talking about that today.
Yep. So again, doing it this way where you mix and match interaction model and conversations, if there's questions you expect at the top level, right, before they've entered into a dialogue, right? So then you'll need to include those in your interaction model. So it feels a little duplicative, but this also leads to a more robust dialogue, is the idea that you're supporting out of goal phrases at any time by this collection of API calls. So in this case, I would put a top level, so I would put a regular intent that CDC guidelines, right? And you can imagine you have are you, touchless, delivery compliant, or whatever you want to call the intent handler. And you have a list of phrases that you expect somebody to ask. And then your skill just returns a response, and then prompts them for action, similar to a generic reprompt, as if they had launched the skill. But if you want to handle that in conversations, and I want to point out something too, you can see an example of those here, which is in the middle of this, we're asking a different question, right? Inquire about feeding size. Later on, where is the, Sorry, it's in a different dialog. Gets over here. Again, we do the same thing, right? The dialog itself is concerned with size, option, or size, crust, and toppings for the two topping pizza order, but it rolls in this option here because we're asking the question, what kind of crust do you have? Which is an ask menu question, and it expects an option. In this case, we're passing the value of crust. We're telling our system like, hey, they want to know about crust, so snatch that value out of their phrasing, right? So they could have said, what kind of cheese do you have? Or what sizes do you have? Or whatever. So again, these are kind of the thing Justin was talking about. So if we wanted to add, I mean, a really quick example. So I would just come over here and I'd say, user says, RUCD, and then you probably want to model this like this, or I don't know if CDC is in the lexicon. Do you know? Anyway, I'm sure it is. Are you CDC compliant? Question. And Alexa says, yes, we are doing contactless probably. And you could just drag this. You probably wouldn't want to put it at the end of after the API success, but you could just drag this anywhere, right? So, oh, I want to ask this question right at the beginning. Okay, what kind of, are you CDC compliant? And you drag this Alexa turn right to after this. And then now you're responsible for sort of filling out what this step does, right? The dialog act is going to invoke an API. We don't have an API built for this, but imagining you go create an API called CDC compliance question. You build a quick utterance set to help, model these, right? So CDC question, for example. So you can see how you can kind of quickly add those. And again, I think you'll want to test on some real users for your skill, is to see how the things they say to your skill that are out of band for the goal, for the original goal, whatever dialogue they're in. And then you'll want to go ahead and beef up those dialogues to kind of handle all these other questions with backing APIs. Just so you know, we do have a feature coming from the product team for, I think it's called static responses. This idea that you can have a list of questions that a user might ask, where we can automatically render a response template without having to touch your Lambda code, right? So this is a great example where I could have used this in this menu question, right? So maybe my menu changes every few years, right? And I'm not changing it sort of weekly or whatever. My sizes are standard, my cheese options are standard, my crust options are really standard. So I don't want to have to write code to handle that. So you can imagine a situation where you automatically map responses to questions in a response template. So I think I can't remember what Adam called it, our product manager. It was may have been just static response templates. So that's something we're working on. They'll make this a lot easier, right? Especially for those out of band questions. So they're not part of the pizza ordering goal per se, but they are, what is this? This is complaining now. Oh yeah, oops, I may have broken this because of those other, all those examples I was adding. Let's try a demo real quick, because this thing did finish building.
Yeah, and then once we finish the demo, I think we should move on to the other things you wanted to cover, and especially since we got a request in the chat, the yes no.
Got it. Oh, I'm just interrupting her.
Oh yes, you should narrate what's going on in the demo, and
got it. Can you hear her? Right, you guys can hear her.
It's very muffled.
Oh, I can crank up the volume, maybe. I don't know. Hopefully that.
Yeah, I almost didn't realize. Ooh,
Ooh. Uh-oh. You getting an echo now?
yes.
Okay.
I was gonna say I almost didn't realize that that you were testing the skill. All of a sudden, I saw it up on the thing. I was like, "Oh, you've started your demo."
Yeah.
So I'm gonna mute myself while you're demoing, so that way, I don't get echoed. And then just iterate what you're saying and explain
Yeah.
what's going on, and speak what you're typing.
Sure. Yeah, so in all these demos, I just do a modal launch. So I'll turn up the volume so hopefully you can hear Alexa's voice through my mic, um, and then if you can't, let me know if you can't hear her, and I'll just narrate her parts as well. So I'm doing a modal launch, right? So the launch phrase for this is just pizza reference. I have a welcome phrase. And there's, again, some logic here. We can actually go back and map this to the resources file. I think it's called the welcome prompt. Now, that welcome prompt does have skills personalization in it, which means take a look at that. This is if they've if the user has set up a voice profile, then we are capturing what's called a person ID. And then there is an Ssml tag to automatically render the user's name. You don't actually get the value in code. You pass the person ID to this SSML tag, and then our system sort of fetches it and dynamically inserts the name into the response. But it could be a good way to personalize your skill. You don't get that through the test tab, so you'll need to do that on a actual device in order to get that person ID. So you would not see it in the request. I think in the request object. Yeah, normally there would be an extra value here for person ID, but I just wanted to call it out because you'll see two different versions of this welcome prompt, one that is personalized and one that's not personalized. And so again, all of this being handled in the regular interaction model. Again, Thursday lunch special because it's sort of before noon. Dynamic, I say no. This is the part where we're generically prompting the user to do something. We know that the order a 2-topping pizza is supported in conversations. So I'm going to say order a 2-topping pizza. And again, I talked about this on Tuesday. This cold start.
Okay, we have small to extra large pieces.
So hopefully you guys heard her. If not, she prompted me to say,
Yes.
Okay, great. Cool. So there was that delay, right? So that is the first time the conversations model is getting loaded into the services that support this test console and your skill overall. Repeated run-throughs, the same model will be much faster. In fact, we could hopefully, let me demonstrate that. So I'll just, to reset the context also, this is an important note when you're testing conversation skills. Once you're in a dialogue, typing a modal launch phrase or something else that's supported in your regular interaction model into this, or using the microphone to say it, you'll be sort of stuck. The test console will be stuck in that dialogue until you exit the skill or perform an action that allows you to delegate back to your skill in code. So in order to reset the context and sort of flush everything, you just need to refresh this tab and start over. So if I open, I'll fast forward.
Right. And I was going to explain, but I don't want to talk over Alexa, so I'll just keep myself on mute.
So this time should be faster. Yeah. Okay, Justin, I'll stop and you can jump in.
I was going to say Alexa's voice is coming in a little choppy right now, so
okay.
I don't know if you made any adjustments on your side, but we're having trouble hearing.
Maybe I'll just narrate her parts instead of trying to, because you're having to do a lot of gymnastics to mute me or mute yourself and all that. So again, order a 2-topping pizza. Supported phrase in the interaction model but its entire goal in life, and I've lost the code. Let me just get back here. Oh, did I say testing? So again, if we just look at search in here. Sorry. And I'll go back to the delegation code so you can see that we had to create that, support that phrase in our interaction model because we're not in the dialog already. Here we go. And that, I have a phrase called order a 2-topping pizza that's mapped to a build my own pizza intent, register the intent handler, and then figure out that they passed a slot value. We should be able to see that after so you should be able to see the actual delegate request here as well. So if we look at the first request, yeah. So the request that was generated from this phrase, order a 2-topping pizza, is the build my own pizza intent, and it has a size slot whose value is 2. So my code interpreted all that and went ahead and passed it off to Alexa Conversations, telling it to start a 2-topping pizza order, which automatically drops the user into that specific dialog. So the dialog we've been showing you over and over again. I do want to turn this on because we'll need this. Okay, so she asked me about size. Let's do a large. So this is doing what's called slot confirmation, and I will make sure to cover that coming up, but I want to, it's kind of a way to just disambiguate input. This is a good segue into this sort of out of goal API handling, right? So if I say like, how many people can that feed? Oh, and I had a book. Oh yeah, sorry about this, guys. Bug I tried to track down this morning, where I'm returning the entire JSON object instead of just the value. So the large usually feeds between 2 and 3 adults. And so, this is an out of band question. You can see that I modeled it, right? How many people can that feed? A large can feed 2 to 4 adults. Again, passing off to a different API and returning to this. But I'm still in the original order a 2-topping pizza, so I can say, you know what, make that an extra large. Yep.
So Alexa said you wanted a large, an extra large pizza. Is that correct?
Yeah. So she confirmed again. So the way the confirmation, now if you'll notice, I didn't actually, in different dialogues, the confirmation step will occur after a value changes or after it's been corrected to make sure. This is kind of shoring up for the user, like, hey, are you sure? And you say, yep, I'm good. Sorry, I keep jumping around too bad here. Here's my test. There it is. This is where we support the affirmation step. And I think there was a question about affirm or deny, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Sandwich20 was asking, oh, can you go over, how you deal with that yes, no?
Yeah. So really, for entity confirmation, if you deny an entity confirmation, the system will automatically re-ask the question for that. Sorry, I keep using entity.
I was going to say, yeah, by entity, you mean slot confirmation.
I'm sorry, yes. So in the Dialog Act is called confirm Args. And so that's a good way to talk about this, right? Which is now, after I've done a correction, so at this top level dialog, I modeled a correction here, right? So the first time they go through this, it's mapped to a variable called size 0. And after they figure out it can only feed 2 to 4 adults, they got a bigger family than that, we support a phrase to do a one-step correction. Change that to an extra large. I map it to a new variable called size1. Now she's going to confirm that slot, confirm the size1, right? So I told the dialog, hey, after a correction, go ahead and confirm the size. So we have a response called confirm size, and that's where it renders the APLA, where you hear, hey, that's a, and then, squiggly bracket size correct. And this is giving the user an opportunity to say yes or no to that. If they affirm, so the dialog model expects to have, when the slots are confirmed, it assigns that slot value to the variable in the context and sort of moves on to the next question. If you deny that, if you say no, that's not correct. Now there's 2 ways to do that. If you just say no, the system will automatically re-ask for that slot. It'll say, okay, we have small to whatever phrases you put in the request args. So in this step, the very first step, I've said, hey, the ask for size response template is responsible for delivering a size argument for the API. So for the simulator and for the actual runtime, you're telling it, this is the response template that knows how to ask this question. And so it knows that if at some point you deny that slot value, it knows which response template to render to get that question asked again. So it automatically handles that for you. You don't actually need to handle the yes/no branching in this case. Now, if the yes/no, it has a different effect on your dialogue, right? So let's think of a situation where maybe you want to offer add-ons, right? You want to offer them a tray of brownies or something. Would you like to order brownies? Yes or no. So you'll need to actually model those in 2 separate dialogues, right? Because there is no built-in behavior for a question of that type, where you're sort of, think of it as a branch in the dialogue path, right? So, branch 1 is, yes, they'd love to add brownies. So let's make sure we know how to ask the questions. Do they want small, medium, or large brownies? Or, maybe you're asking them an ambiguous question, like, do you want to add some sides, right? And they say yes. Well, there's a set of questions that would follow an affirmation that would be different from the set of behaviors if they said no. If they say no, you'll want to model a new dialogue that maybe just ends this order flow, right? Says, okay, they're not adding any sides. They reached their goal of ordering a pizza, so I'm done. And in the other case, the yes case, you're asking a new set of questions, collecting new slots to maybe call a different API, right? And so that's you'll need to understand when the system handles yes, no, so affirm it or denies differently, and it mostly revolves around slots, and that the system is pre-built to handle re-asking the questions on what's called a slot confirmation step, right? So that's specifically, there's 2 different kind of confirms, and we'll get back to this. I think it was actually the next topic, but we can start mentioning it here, right? Confirm args has this built-in behavior of like, hey, if you say no, I'm going to re-ask you the question. Whereas confirm API we'll get to later, but it's literally a yes/no gate to calling your API, and we'll talk about that soon.
Right. So to reiterate that, confirm args, the follow-up question, if they say no, to ask again to refill that value, is built in. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to. Do you even have to model that out in your sample dialog, or does it just automatically ask?
Anything where you can reduce the number of turns, I think, to get the user to their goal faster is advisable. So while it supports the built-in behavior of a user just saying no, or any of the other phrases that are a deny, right? No thanks, no, nope, no way, forget it. Then the system, again, when you're putting a context in frame, you're just telling it, hey, these are the list of questions you have to ask before you're allowed to call my API. So the system just says like, well, wasn't able to fill a slot for size because they said no. So I need to ask that question at some point. It may not even be in order is another point. So it's not deterministic. It may move on to asking about the crust or the toppings, but it'll eventually get back to saying, well, most of the time it will re-ask the question right away. But I would personally model the corrective phrases in the deny step, right? So let's take a look at that. So I think in my utterance set, like specify, let me say, specify 2 topics. Here we go, perfect example of it. So this is a deny and a correct, a one-step correction in a single phrase, right? So you're helping the model along by saying like, I don't have to explicitly change the dialog act to no. Instead, I'm just going to support them automatically correcting this on the fly by remapping these variables. So, the first time they say I want pepperoni and sausage, and the second time they say like, no, change that to pepperoni and mushroom. And the system will remap those slot variables and confirm if you have that dialog act step built into your modeled in your dialog.
That's really cool that you can cancel and remap all in one go.
Yeah.
And you don't have to write any backend code to handle that.
Yeah. Again, the confirm args, this is specific behavior where the model is pre-built to understand that it needs to re-ask those questions, whereas modeling yes/no variations that are literally a branch in the dialog, not just confirming previous entries from the user. That's the difference. That's how you need to think about it. Is, oh wait, is the dependency of this yes/no question a new branch in the dialog? If that's the case, you need to model that separately in a top-level dialog versus confirming arguments, which is or slots, which is pre-built in for you. Do we want to move on to API confirmation? We have about 30 minutes left.
Yes, and this is perfect timing because Sandwich was saying this is great to know, and I'm really interested in confirm API. So,
awesome.
Yeah, we're right on track.
Okay, cool. So, in this case, a confirm API is not strictly required. That's the first thing I'll mention. So a confirm API is like a gateway, literally a yes/no gateway that if they say yes, or any of the other affirm models, the affirm phrases that indicate they want to go forth with, and you want to think of these probably in transactional scenarios, right? So before you're getting ready to do something that affects the user's account or makes a payment or completes an order or some sort of final like, hey, are you sure? That's an appropriate place to use confirm API. So the confirm API is really just a summary of everything they've done to that point. You'll need a response template that supports. So first of all, what you do in a confirm step is you tell it which API you're going to confirm, and it will pre-fill the arguments to the API, right? So these are all the required arguments for the order 2 topping pizza API, crust, first topping, second topping, and size. Now, the response template that's going to ask the question, okay, and if we look at how this is modeled, if you look at this phrase, okay, I have an extra large pepperoni and jalapeno on deep dish. Sorry, is that correct? Okay. So we need to pass the values. Now in this case, originally I had topping 0 and topping 1, but because I modeled a corrective step in here, so first she asked, what toppings do you want? and I say, okay, first topping is this, second topping is that. I want tomato and basil. Tomato is mapped to topping 0, basil topping 1. And she says, just to confirm, you said tomato and basil, right? It's a confirmation step for the slots. Actually, make that pepperoni topping 2 and jalapeno topping 3, right? So I'm just sort of moving the index along. Now, if they just said yes here, these values would be mapped in the confirmation step in the API confirmation to topping 0 and topping 1, and our system would know how to do that. So this is the confirmation, confirm API. So you're passing the values collected in the dialog to the expected values for the API. So you're telling our system like, hey, these things that were collected along the way, whether they were corrected slots or not, these are what I want you to render in the prompt. So that she knows how to ask the question. And again, if they say yes to this, then your API is called. Like literally the next thing that happens is you get an API request to your Lambda function. Now, if they say no, there is the default behavior at this point is that the request more template is automatically rendered. So you as a developer at this moment, and there are some improvements coming to this in the near term, but at the moment, it automatically renders the request more template. So if we look over here, let's look at what that says. I think it's very generic in the beginning. Yeah, okay, what would you like to do next? So you could change this to be more specific. You could pass it some arguments from the current context it's in to say, hey, try to indicate to this prompt where the user was, so we can give them some sort of intelligent guidance. But at the moment, if they deny an API confirmation step, it's as if you sort of bailed out of this conversation. And there is, I think, a known issue. I don't know if it's listed in the known issues, but that, and I think this is getting, it may already be fixed. It was supposed to be sort of this week time frame, but the idea is that there's a current issue where if the user enters back into this same dialog, that the values for the context are preserved. So you get kind of a little bit of a broken CX at this point, which is why you want to be really specific about your question to maybe lead them into a different dialogue for now until this issue is resolved. But let me give you an example of what happens. So if I say, okay, I have a large thin crust pepperoni and jalapeno pizza on regular cheese, is that right? And I say no, and the request more template renders, and it says, okay, what would you like to do next? Assuming I haven't changed that at all. And I say, order a 2-topping pizza. Well, the context will believe that this, oh, sorry, this is on a different dialog. The context will believe that these are all filled already, and jump straight, it'll say like, well, do I have any questions left to ask? Nope, I've got a value for size, I've got a value for crust, and I have topping 1 and topping 2. So it jumps straight to, guess what? The API confirmation step. And it asks the same question again. Okay, that's a extra large pepperoni and jalapeno and deep dish. Is that correct? And so that is the broken CX at this point when it comes to API confirmation, which is why I would probably recommend just using entity confirmation at this point, right? There's no reason you can't confirm all the entities in a single step or do it along the way, kind of like we did here, rather than, you could just model this as a confirm arg, and if they affirm it, the next step can just be to call the API, right? And so that's a little bit safer way to sort of make sure your dialogues are more robust and don't lead to this issue. So the issue is that will be fixed is that if they re-enter to the same dialog, any slots that are filled that are part of that new dialog will be reset. But if there's slots that are filled that are not part of that API goal, they'll be preserved, right? So I'll give you a perfect example. So
right. And I just wanted to chime in real quick. Somebody was asking a question in the Slack group about like, when does the context get cleared? And so I just wanted to call out that like, that's one of the cases where it gets cleared, which is what you're talking about now, if they deny an API.
Yeah. Yeah, so when they deny an API, the fix will be, and again, I think it's either this week or it's anytime now. Fix will be that when. Is that you, Justin? Is that a car? That wasn't me.
Yeah, sorry, I think I bumped
Okay.
something. Let me put myself on mute. Sorry about that.
No worries. It was just like you had a hot rod outside your window. Let's see. If on that reprompt, the generic reprompt of the request more template being rendered, they say order a 2-topping pizza, and it requires size, crust, and 2 toppings. Those will be reset. But if as a part of a different dialog flow you had collected, let's say, the user's name or the user's allergies or something, some other variable that you were sort of carrying around as to make your prompts more intelligent, it would preserve those because they're not part of this API. So it's basically telling the system, hey, they said no to that order or the API goal with these choices. So let's re-ask them those choices if they chose to go back into this dialog. So it's a little bit tricky, but you want to play around with how you really, in my opinion, it comes down to more intelligently guiding your user. So if you ask really generic questions, you have a lot higher likelihood that your users will experience this. Whereas if you ask really directed questions to lead them to specific paths and specific distinct dialogues that handle just a subsection of your overall goal, and do any disambiguation or so forth in your Lambda code, where you can intelligently suggest next steps by delegating to the right part in your conversation, in your model dialogues, rather than trying to handle it all in a single monolithic dialogue. That's where I think users would be more frustrated because they would get to the end of this thing and something was wrong. They say no, and then they feel like they have to start over this sort of massive data collection exercise, disambiguation exercise. And instead, if the dialogues were more discrete and smaller, and the APIs were constrained to a specific goal, such that it touches your Lambda function with some data, and then you on that side, using the business logic of like what you need to do next, guide them to the next very specific dialogue. Cool.
Yeah, and while you were chatting, and you brought up a good point about confirmations and when to use them, and that reminded me of a blog post that I wrote, and I was amazed to see that when I found it, and I was amazed to see that how much the technology has progressed, because the examples in the code are like version 1 of the SDK. And it's talking about like yes, no intents and when to do confirmations. I'll share the post in the chat. It's old, so I would say don't look at the code references and don't try to paste and copy this into your skills, especially if you're working with Alexa conversations. But the meat of the blog post is still relevant to when you should ask for confirmations, so you don't overdo it. And actually, what I'll do, I can't paste the anchor link to it. I'll paste in the chat the words that I want you to. Oh, it's too long. I can't paste it. Okay. What I'll do is I'll read out this section, and then I'll paste the link to the blog post. Again, don't look at this code. This code is old. It's the old SDK. You don't want to use that. The version 2 of the SDK is way better than the first version. But you can see how the technology has progressed in just 2 years' time. But the section header of the post says, confirm things with the user sparingly. And it says, when designing your interactions, you should consider the conversation that your customer will have with the skill. Following up with slot confirmations after everything they say may at the surface appear to be a great way to ensure that your skill has collected the correct information. However, overdoing it can wear your customer out. And so it gives some recommendations on when, and essentially it's when you're going to do something that has some ramifications if it's wrong in the real world. Like Nathan earlier mentioned, if you're making a purchase or transferring money or doing something like that, you would want to make sure that you confirm in those cases. So I'm going to share that blog post again. The sample code, you don't want to copy and paste that into your code, because chances are it will break because it's using version 1 of the SDK and we're at version 2 at the moment. So look at the code samples there as wow, that's really progressed. It's only been a little over 2 years since this blog post was published. I just want to repeat the information about what you should do in certain situations is what you should read and how you should interpret this information, but don't copy and paste the code. So yes, I just as you were bringing that up, Nathan, I was like, oh yeah, I wrote a blog post about this very topic. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, I just want to pass it back to you.
Cool. So I'm continuing with the demo, and it actually dovetails into the next topic, which is debugging. I actually just used the debugger to solve a problem while Justin was talking, and I want to walk you guys through that. So notice that we took a long break between showing you this example and the next question it asked, which was, okay, on what kind of crust? We have thin, deep dish, regular, and Brooklyn style, which is the ask for crust step of the order 2 topping pizza dialog. Sorry, I got a tickle in my throat. So I specified deep dish, and she says, okay, what 2 toppings would you like? Now, in this case, I said, okay, pepperoni and jalapeno. And you look at the confirmation step, just to confirm, you want blank and blank. In fact, it rendered the prompt, but this is pretty clearly saying, hey, the mapping you have for in your APLA doc to dereference something is broken, or it wasn't passed. So if we go and look, these are all timestamped events. And again, you can see the last time I touched the skill was like 11:20. We talked for 20 minutes, and then I started filling in the next step of the dialogue. So this is in our developer documentation. So debugging an electrical conversation skill. What you're going to want to do is flip on that device log and then look for events of this type. So skill debugger.capture debugging info. And it will have a conversation model prediction type, right? So there's lots of these events. So you're clicking through, and what you're looking for, so this is capture debugging info, that's cool. But then this type, skill execution info, we're not interested in that, not interested in that. Skill execution info, no. Aha, conversations model predictor, right? And this is all the way back to the crust option. And what this is saying is, okay, great. What I heard was deep dish, and that maps to a slot type called crust. Well, why does it map to it? Because you've given the interaction models / slots values, and those slots were encoded and trained, and so it says, hey, they said the word deep dish, that matches a value over here in this slot type, and so I'm going to map that to slot. And it says, what's the next action? So this is where this seeker predictor of the runtime is saying, well, the next thing I need to do is ask for 2 toppings, and it doesn't take any input. It's just a question, right? So what 2 toppings would you like? It actually renders the phrase right here. So it kind of unpacks the APL, but it actually names the request template, well, response template, but whose dialog act is set to request. It tells you the name here. So if you're getting a wrong prediction, if it's asking, it's inserting something here that seems weird, you'll want to go back to your annotated dialogues and see, well, like, why does it think it needs to ask that question next? Okay, but let's go to the next one. And sorry. Execution info, no. Where is it? I had it. There we go. This is it. So the next one was, I said pepperoni and jalapeno, but when it went to the confirmation step, it seemed to not know about them. Well, why was that, right? So let's look at what happened here. So the skill debugger, again, this is the conversations model prediction and phrases to slots, right? So in my utterance set for this, we have it mapped to support the phrase of like topping 1 or first topping and second topping. And I can maybe pop over there and just show you that really quick. I think it's specify 2 toppings. There we go. Right. So here's the phrase that supports that, right? Blah and blah. Great. But these are named first topping and second topping, which is weird. Okay, I mean, that's okay, because that's what I have in my annotated dialogue. And it says, okay, it heard the word for pepperoni, and it's pretty sure that's a toppings type. And it heard jalapeno, and that's a toppings type. And look, it passed to my response template that's doing the confirm Args step. It passed these 2 values. Like literally, this is what gets passed into the response template, first topping and second topping. It says, okay, well, that's weird. Everything resolved. The ASR worked. It mapped it to the right variables. Those variables will pass to my response template. Why didn't it render? Okay, so let's go back and look at that response template. And again, it's confirm 2 toppings. And again, I tried to, when Alexa was just saying something, put the word speak. When she's asking a question, put the word ask. And then, but not always map the specific dialogue act. So I think it is confirm 2 toppings. Here it is. So just to confirm, you want topping A and topping B. That's wrong. Why are these still in there? So we'll actually delete these out of this response template because the names are actually first topping and second topping. So now we're going to go back and change this to first topping and second topping and save it. Oh, screen prompt failed. Oh, delete. Well, that's not good. I don't know what's up with that, but let me save this here. Oh, my session expired. Okay, that's great. Okay, so and you can see these reverted because it's not accepting any of my changes because my session's expired.
Yep. Too much talking.
Sorry.
No.
That's weird because my session could be alive here and then not there, but I'm sure it's
yeah, it's probably has something to do with multiple tabs and
yep.
Yeah. And
so again, all that information is still valuable, right? So it's telling us, hey, the thing your response template's expecting is a key called first topping and a key called second topping, not what you have mapped here, topping A and topping B. Those don't exist. So let's just again change those. And I think we should be able to delete this. Hey, that works better. And I can save this now. To realize changes in your prompts in your response templates, you do have to do a rebuild. So it seems odd given this is just some APLA code underneath. but it is part of the model. So I would have to do a rebuild here to hear this change. But this should fix it. So this is, I think this, this debugger info can be really valuable because it's giving you it's giving you the specific names and the ASR value, right? So if she's hearing something wrong, and maybe you need to add new slot values, maybe it's something she heard, but it's not a member of the slots you have. She gives you the name of the variables being passed. She gives you the name of the response template being rendered. And all of this as part of the next step that she predicted. So if this is not what you expected to happen, you'll want to go and change your dialogue to be more specific, right? Maybe change the order and so forth. So anyway, I really think this debugging info can help disambiguate when you're kind of wondering, hey, I don't know what happened. The other problem, and I will say this too, and I think some of you guys have experienced this. At least I've been seeing these kind of questions on the Slack channels, which is, hey, how do I know that Conversations is working correctly? Because from my Lambda function, I don't see anything. And so this is an important note that the only time your Lambda function gets called is when on an API call. And that's the moment in time when you as a developer say, okay, well, this dialog I built that is loading this API context, and therefore it's like, here's a list of questions you need to ask in order to fill these slots before you can call my API. At that moment, you get this sort of wad of JSON in your Lambda function, and that's your chance to say, like, okay, well, some of these slots match what I expect, some don't. You can't re-ask the question. Whereas this gives you some visibility into the runtime. So the kind of the state of the context at any given moment, and what slots have been filled and what slots haven't, and so forth. So it's a good way, and I would get start using this. You do have to do a little bit of spelunking in here to kind of, but luckily you can iterate. Once you click this devices log, you can just kind of click through these quickly to find the ones you want.
Yeah, I think it's a great tool, and I think it really helps figure out, like, oh, hey, what's going on here? Why is this interpreting it in this way? And I've seen people in the chat like say, oh, hey, I'm trying to use the utterance profiler in order to like view how it's interpreting where to go. And so I think it's important that we point out, like, and direct people, like, hey, yeah, if you want to debug your model for Alexa Conversations, check that device log and go down and go through the logs, and you can figure that out and find it what the problem is. And we do have some documentation on how to use that tool. I'm going to drop that in the chat for all you.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to talk about is response templates overall. I don't know if some of you have noticed that most of the time response templates are used to ask a question. But for any of you who've played with the response templates where you're just having Alexa say something, a static response, you'll notice that the microphone opens at the end of, regardless of what you're doing, the mic opens and expects user input. And so you actually see examples of this. This is a good example, right? How many people can that feed? A large can feed 2 to 4 adults. Now, if those of you have been testing on the console, you wouldn't necessarily notice this because the sort of mic is sort of permanently open, available for you to type something here or push this microphone button. But in this case, once you test on a real device, you can see that this would be an inadequate. In fact, now the way I represented this dialogue is that they perform this corrective step as a reaction to knowing that it can feed between 2 and 4 adults. It's like, okay, no, change that to an extra large. But what happened here is the mic opened, and it's not necessarily clear to the user what the system initiative is at that point, right? So maybe the way to make this better would be large can fit 2 to 4 adult. Do you want to stick with that size? Or, I can buoy this up, but some sort of question that you need to put at the end of these response templates. And you'll see this over and over again, right? Which is, now there is if you choose to render the by response template, the built-in BYE, this one, right? And you can change this phrase, right? Right now, the default is just by. But if they say something where, you want to, they want to exit the skill, of course, Alexa exit, that's just the session ended, and that doesn't even hit you don't get an opportunity to respond to that as a developer. But if they say something where you want to sort of force exit the skill and not reopen the mic, this by template will do that. But for all of the other templates, especially the ones you build, it will open the microphone at the end of the response, right? So you need to have this is this idea of dialogue chaining, right? So this idea that at the end of the dialogue, you're either rendering the request more template, the generic reprompt, hey, what would you like to do? Or you're putting sort of intelligent guidance at the end of your responses to give them a hint about what to say to kind of lead them down to the next thing, right?
Right.
So it's a real important note about response templates that it doesn't catch developers until they actually go to test on a real device or in certification, because I've been testing on using the test console the entire time. But then there's all this mic behavior where like it'll fail certification because you just rendered a response to a question they asked as an API call and then stopped, but the mic is open, right? And that would fail certification. And the way to fix that is just in your response templates, go ahead and answer the question. And at a minimum, put what would you like to do next as the end of that response. If you can provide context to that response template that gives it an idea of a more specific question to ask, do that, right? But at a very minimum, make sure you're ending your response template, your APLA prompts in a question.
Yeah, I think that's some really great advice, and anything that you can do to avoid failing certification in advance, right? Because that just if you aren't aware, or if you have one of your prompts come back without that question, that's immediately going to fail certification, and then you have to fix the problem and then resubmit. So if you're getting ready to submit your skill for the hackathon, if you remember, the deadline for is September 14th. So you got roughly 18 to 17 days left. So you want to make sure that you have those prompts in the questions in your templates.
Yep. Cool. We're at time, so I'm happy to take on any more questions. And if you guys want to jump over to the Slack channel, I'll try to jump in there more often, not just what I'm doing in AMA, to see if I can answer some questions.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm sure everyone will appreciate that as well. The more people we have in there answering questions, the quicker people will get their questions answered. Somebody asked me a question about APLA the other day, which was really cool. I went and started experimenting and playing with the APLA editor tool, because I'm like, I know that like this works. Let me like play with this and give them some code that they can then go play with. So I was able to create like a fun little document. There's a that takes a list that returns from your API and then iterates through that list and builds them into the response. So that was a fun one. So yeah, keep your questions coming on the Slack group. I enjoy answering them as much as you enjoy getting the answer.
Cool. think we
Yeah.
covered everything. Yeah. Confirmation templates, debug info, and response templates. Yay. We got through it all. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
All right. Well, yes. If nobody has any burning questions, that they want to have answered on stream, you can go into the Slack group, and I'll drop the link to the Slack group just in case you're tuning in partway through and you're like, what's the Slack group that they're talking about? You can get to it from the Alexa Conversations dev post page resources. So I'll paste that link into the chat, as well as the link to join the Slack group. And so you can just go into the Slack group and ask your question, and we'll gladly help. So yes, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you so much, Nathan, for your time. This has been really, really informative. We've shown people how to get started with Alexa Conversations with the pet match example, which shows the basics and helps you get that mental model that you need in order to understand the 5 different build time components, and also how things work at runtime. And then the pizza reference skill, as you were mentioning, being on the North Star team, is to take things and stretch them to their boundaries. We're taking that core foundational knowledge of that was built upon PetMatch, and it's stretching it, so you can think of PetMatch as Alexa Conversations 101, and the pizza reference skill as the 300 and above level courseware. So again, yeah, thank you so much for all the work that you put into this, and coming on and giving your time to everyone to walk through what you built.
Cool. Thanks for helping me along as a Twitch newbie. I appreciate your help as well.
Yeah, and again, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for building skills. You're the ones who are pushing the needle forward, and making great Alexa conversational skills with the future of voice design on Alexa. So thank you all for tuning in, and good luck with the hackathon. And with that, we'll see you next time.